There's a good chance that some point in your past you've given a speech, whether that was for a class, for a organization, for your job, or even for another personal reason. There's also a chance you might have never given a speech before. Regardless of if you've given a speech or if you've never given one, you may experience some public speaking apprehension. You get nervous when you have to give a speech. If you are nervous about giving a speech, do not feel lonely. As you can see by this chart, it's a top fear of college students. In their 2012 study, Is Public Speaking Really More Feared Than Death? Dwyer and Davidson looked at women and men and tried to figure out, well, is speaking before a group really more frightening? As you can see, financial problems, death, loneliness, they all come under speaking before a group. They got the highest scores. You may think, well, 2012, that was a while back. Maybe it's changed. Here's a study done in 2016 by Chapman University. And they did see some changes in our fears. This chart shows different domains. But if we zoom in to this personal fears list, you see that we still have top personal fears of being tight spaces, public speaking, clowns, and vaccines. So why are we so afraid of public speaking? It could be a lack of practice, or it could be that we're following some bad advice. Think about all the bad advice that you've heard on public speaking. Tell the audience that you're nervous. Why would you tell the audience that you're nervous about speaking in front of them? I think this is done more so to show that you're a human being and that just like your audience members, you're human. You get nervous. However, this is one of those moments where you set the bar pretty low. Your audience thinks, wow, okay, this may not be the best speech ever. And if you give a bad speech, they blame it on your nervousness. But if you give a good speech, they just think to themselves, wow, man, I really wish you hadn't been so nervous, because then your speech would have been even better. Another piece of bad advice you may have heard, start with an irrelevant joke. It's done to break the ice, but sometimes it just feels awkward. Keep in mind that whatever you say when you give a speech, you need to start with something that's completely relevant to your audience, to your topic. And also be aware that there's a good chance your joke may not be as funny as you think it is. Another piece of advice, wait until the end to reveal the main point. Sometimes people think that they need to reveal the big idea at the end of a speech to surprise people. No, do not do that. Your audience wants to know what they're about to hear. Think of your audience as lazy listeners. If you don't tell them pretty soon in your speech why they should listen to you, they won't listen to you. So if you wait until the end to reveal the main point, there's a good chance they didn't hear a word that you actually said. Use big words. Man, if you use a big word, people won't understand sometimes. Or they may think that you're trying too hard. If you use a big word, make sure that you explain it. Make sure it's relevant to what you have to say in your speech. Don't just use a big word to be fancy. Picture the audience naked. Ugh. I mean, what if there's someone in the audience that you don't want to see naked? Or someone you do want to see naked? That would be really, really awkward either way. While it's meant to make you think, yes, we're all human, just don't picture your audience naked. Practice in front of the mirror is just like saying your speech. Wrong. You can see yourself giving your speech to some degree, but having eyes on you, even if it's just a small audience of friends and family members, really does get you acquainted with the feeling of giving a speech in public in front of more people. Practicing in front of the mirror, you get confident, then you think, yes, I can do it, and then those odds happen to fall on you. And I've seen student after student just surprise themselves by how they changed, how their nerves kicked in when all of a sudden they were no longer alone. Avoid eye contact. Look at the forehead. In the everyday one-on-one conversation, this would be horrible advice, right? To look at someone's forehead and not make eye contact? Well, think about it. Wouldn't that also be bad advice for public speaking? People can usually tell when you're looking them in the eye. In a large room, that may work to look at their forehead, but when you make eye contact, you also make a connection with your audience. Everyone feels like you see them, like you're really trying to make that connection. Probably the worst piece of advice I've ever heard: just wing it. Never wing a speech. You're more likely to get more nervous if you just wing it, because you haven't practiced and you don't have anything prepared. Let's talk about good advice to counteract all that bad advice we just talked about. So remember that your audience wants someone who's competent, who's trustworthy as a speaker. This is the idea of ethos. When Aristotle, who's kind of seen as the father of public speaking, when he looked at all the public speakers out there, he realized, wow, they're just making stuff up. They're not trustworthy. And he realized, hey, when you communicate, you have to be ethical. You can kind of see the word ethical coming out of ethos. So remember, your audience wants someone who's competent, someone they can trust. Audience want information that makes sense. Logos. That kind of seems like the word logical, right? So make sure you have a very structured speech. Introduction, body, conclusion. Make sure that it follows a logical pattern. Make sure you give strong support to claims that you make in your speech. And lastly, also remember that audiences want connections and commonality. Pathos. Pathos is usually connected to the idea of emotionality. You can kind of see the word pathetic. You may see the word empathy or sympathy or even apathy with that same root. Those words all connect to this idea of feeling. Whether it's you feel connected to that person, empathy or sympathy, or if you feel very little connection to that person, apathy and pathetic. So make sure that you are doing the extra mile, making that eye contact, giving stories that show a connection and commonality. So we've talked about focusing on that audience, but also visualize yourself doing well. Sometimes you build it up in your head, hey, I'm just going to mess up. I'm going to stutter and I'm going to have sweaty palms and everything's just going to go wrong. And then what happens? The very thing you visualize goes wrong. But what if you visualize success? What if you saw yourself doing well? What if you saw a standing ovation? You're more likely to have that if you visualize that. Decrease your sensitivity. So if you have some fear of public speaking, start small. Maybe practice in the mirror the first go round. Then on your next practice in front of your dog or your cat or your goldfish. They will still love you. Practice in front of a family member or a friend that you trust and who's very supportive. Then practice in front of some classmates, some peers who know what this assignment is and can help you through it. This is going to decrease your sensitivity. The more you do it, step by step, incrementally, it's going to feel less intimidating. Make sure you learn the skills as well. Learn how to structure a speech properly. Learn how to make eye contact. This is a great time to look at what your instructor is doing, to look at the things that you're being taught, and to start practicing in every single day life. And when you practice them in every single day life, you're more likely to do them in your speech. Next, you see practice. I don't think I could say that enough. If I had more space, I would keep typing in practice, 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 practice. I think this is one of the most understated reasons up there because you honestly can't say it enough. People, time after time, have come to me and said, man, I just wish I would have practiced more. I thought I'd practiced enough, but I guess I didn't. I didn't feel as confident. Maybe if I would practice, I would have felt better. And then I've had those same people come to me after the fact, after a different speech with more practice, and they felt confident. They felt going into the speech they were going to do well. And then after the speech, they knew that they had done well. And lastly, remember to breathe, smile. For some people, once you start talking, you will just sink into your own natural rhythm. You will feel comfortable. But if you're not one of those people, make little notes to yourself on your note cards or on your sheet of paper. Breathe, smile, connect to your audience, but don't pass out at the same time. So, regardless if you've given a speech before or if you've not given a speech before, there's a good chance if you're watching this video, you will be giving a speech in the upcoming future. So remember all those bad pieces of advice, knock those out of your head as soon as possible, and take in those good pieces of advice.